So many of us predicted, because, again, we followed the golden rule. What would I do if I was in his shoes? So many of us predicted we'd never see Conor again. I think his check's going to look about $115 million. And with the taxes and the trainers and the man, he's going to walk with $50 million. And most of us would never see 50, 50. He walks
more than
with.
That,
That's
Chael.
his money.
Go ahead.
What? Hold on. He'll get a check for 115. I'm saying with taxes, with managers, with everything he's got to deal with, he's going to walk with about 50.
Okay.
It'll be north of that, but you get the point.
I get you.
Most people would never see the bottom of that pile of money. He will. Conor likes to spend. More than making money, he likes to spend money. And I think he will fight again. I think he's a purist. I think aside from the money, he really does enjoy the sport. I also appreciate that he respects tradition. He respects the fact that the history of fighting says if you're 1-1 with an opponent, you go to match 3. That's what history says. He's already speaking on it. I think he's going to have Nate Diaz next. I think he's going to make about $10 million.
That's it.
Big, that's a fantastic number, but that's hard to do when you're making, you're leaving with 50 and all of a sudden you're going to leave with 6. But I think that he believes in it and he's going to do it. I'm starting to realize that with time. If you would have asked me a month ago, I'd say we're probably not going to see him again. But I don't think that's the case. I think he's the real deal, likes what he does, and is going to continue with it.
This is my only thing with that, Chael, is when and I agree. I think if he does fight in the UFC, which I do think is his next fight, and he fights Nate Diaz, that is the fight. I agree with you on that. I don't think you're going to see it as soon as we think, though, because there's no way that they can go, hey, Conor, yeah, thanks for doing that, man. We know you made north of $100 million. Now, here's the biggest pay-per-view of all time, you versus Nate. We're going to give you $10 million. He's going to go, you're crazy. You know how much me and Nate can go to a boxing match in Dublin. I'll make twice that, at least. And Nate's going to make way more, too. And then the UFC goes, no, we get that. And now you got to wear Reebok, and they're paying you $100,000 too. He's going to laugh at that. There's no way you can confine him to the current contract that you have him under and expect him to headline this biggest pay-per-view of all time. There's just no way. So there has to be some dispute there. There's going to have to be some give on UFC's part, not too much give on Conor's part because he's steering the ship. So I just don't see how they get this done without giving him some sort of the most lucrative contract in UFC history. I just don't see how they're going to come to terms right now. And then what's Nate going to do?
Yeah, and there's ways they could do it, Brendan. They'd have to break the current mold. Here, I'll just give you an example. Instead of doing $50 for a HD pay-per-view, maybe Conor fights are now $75, and that would find him that missing money. If those kind of things change and some of those parameters changed, and there is a lineage to that. There are certain boxers that do cost more for the pay-per-views than other boxers. Mm-hmm. There is a way to do that. They got to break their mold, though. And maybe you got to go back to Reebok. Everybody's saying, hey, we can't do it. We've got locked into a contract. And they are. That's true. But maybe you got to, fly out, sit down with the executive of Reebok and go, hey, I'm in a jam here. Maybe we got to refund you a little bit of money. But I got to let this guy wear, and then, fill in the blank. And Notorious Whiskey is probably going to be what he wants to walk out in. And so maybe you do have to change a couple of the things around. But, yes, if you operate in the current confines of the contracts and the way that the business is done, I mean, they do have a cap. There is only, you can't just come in and go, we'll give you $100 million on a show that's going to generate 90. So,
but those current contracts, Chael, I don't mean to interrupt you, but those current contracts were, those were done and published under, the same old elephant in the circus, and then you get this freaking sparkled Irish green elephant and they go, whoa. We don't have a contract for that. We didn't think he could get to that level. So I think the UFC and the WME are going to have to break the mold here. And, I ask you this, do you think they would give him a percentage of the company? Do you think that's a possibility? Yes.
I think that I would not. If I was in their shoes, I would not. I'd want to have, one night pay and be able to be done and move on with my books. But I have to say yes to your question because Dana spoke on that. Dana came out in an interview last week. I trust that you saw it. And he said, I expect this conversation to come. I'm not going to shy away from it. In fact, I welcome it, but I'm sure he's going to ask for a percentage. And Dana made it sound like he's going to get a percentage. Whether that's 1 point or 3 points, he's going to get something.
I don't think we find out if he does. I don't think we find out what those exact numbers are because you're going down a slippery road now because, unless Conor's only fighting Nate and then he's done. But if he's planned to fight Nate and to defend the belt and fight a few more times, which I don't think is realistic, but if he is, then, if you're Tony Ferguson, if you're Kevin Lee, you're going, hold up. I have to fight this guy. He's making all this money. I'm fighting him too, but he also owns part of the company. Isn't there a conflict of interest right now?
There sure could be, particularly if they do get enveloped into the Ali Act. There would be a major problem there. But, let's just see where that all goes. I don't know how those conversations are going to end up. And then, what is Conor's shelf life? As we know, man, we've seen some big stars in all sports. You bring in Jordan into the conversation if you want. Big stars in all sports, but if they're not out there constantly, if they're not reminding people constantly why they're on top and why they're the guy, they do get replaced. So how many of these does Conor want to do? I think there's a couple of speculations here. First off, in his next MMA fight, we're all going to assume his hands are so much better. The other side of that coin is he spent 8 months focusing only on his hands. Did the other stuff get rusty? Is his next MMA performance not going to live up to the hype? I can use an example. A guy named John Smith from amateur wrestling won the Olympic Games while still in college. Came back the next year to college. Now he's the best guy on all of Earth. He's got the gold medal, but freestyle, which he did in the Olympic Games, is different than what they do in college. He lost his very first college wrestling match. He was the number one guy on the globe, and he lost a dual meet to a kid from Nebraska whose name I couldn't even produce for you. But the relevance of that, of focusing on one, does take away from the other. It's enough for some speculation for me. I'm very curious what Nate Diaz has been doing the last 8 months. Everybody, Eddie Alvarez, Jose Aldo, Nate Diaz, whoever's example you want to use, they had a major opportunity in these last 8 months while Conor took his eye off the ball and focused on boxing. They had a big opportunity to be in the gym and close that gap. And if any of them sat around and go, well, I'm not going to do that until I have a contract, missed opportunity, big missed opportunity. So let's see. But there's speculation there. Can he beat Nate again? Nate wasn't Nate for part two, and he's never told that story publicly, but he was not himself. I mean, hurt. It's enough to get me to... Right. Yeah, it was enough for me to get. Yeah, he was hurt. Didn't train right. Didn't feel right in the cage, and still it was razor close. I think we'd see that fight, and if they wanted to put a higher pay-per-view dollar on it, so that Conor could make $10 on the back end instead of $350. Man, I think that a lot more people are like me that are going to. Yeah, I don't care. I'm going to push the button.